It is time to start reflecting on the 2025 season, what we've witnessed in the last 11 months. And we're going to do so here with a audit of my top 10 prediction from the start of the year. Let's see what I got wrong, what I got right. I think it's a useful activity for multiple reasons. First and foremost, it's entertaining. Isn't that why we're all here? Second, I like the accountability. And third, it provides good context. I think it's healthy to sort of take a time machine and sort of remember where we were at about a year ago and how things played out from there. It provides some context that I always really sort of enjoy. So we're going to go through my top 10 prediction, see where I was right, where I was wrong. So without further ado, let's get into my top 10 prediction. We'll start at the top, and I had Alcaraz as my world number one, and this was my reasoning. I think this is going to be the year of psychological growth for Carlos Alcaraz. Less dips in matches, more consistent tactical focus, and getting over losses better. Looking back at Alcaraz's season, feel like that ended up being pretty bang on because the decision-making on court for Carlos has never been more consistent and clear-headed. The emotional volatility has been dialed down a ton. And really just since the clay court season on, it's been the most consistent stretch of Alcaraz's career, not to mention the technical improvements that he's made off of both wings as well as his serve. My number two was indeed Jannik Sinner, and that did end up being another correct prediction. Here was my reasoning for picking Sinner at number two. You have to factor in the possibility of a suspension. That's just reality. You know, CAS is unpredictable. Historically, very favorable to appellants. WADA is an appellant. There was negligence in this case, but it's a complex case where the CAS is going to have to determine whether or not Sinner is liable at all for that negligence. And I don't know how it's going to go. I really don't think it's going to be a hefty suspension, but that's the only opinion I have on it. I don't know if there is going to be, no suspension or a small suspension. However you want to categorize small. I don't know what that even is. Needless to say, Alcaraz doesn't have this potential hazard. And again, boy, it's 1A, 1B. We've seen it in this rivalry. There is very little between the two. That might be the kind of thing, along with, I think, some easier and more obvious improvements that Alcaraz can make, that just decides this for me. And we know how that played out. Sinner ended up getting that 3-month suspension, which, as I alluded to back then, I felt was always a real possibility that would have needed to be factored in. And that ended up being the difference maker, given how tight it was between Alcaraz and Sinner. There is almost no way that Carlos would have ended up number one had Sinner played a full season and not missed any time in February, March, and April. My number three was Alexander Zverev. So I did get the top three right. Here is what I said about Zverev. Biggest hazard, though, is, man, he takes another loss in a major final. He's 27 already. This isn't like a Murray-Lendl situation where people say, oh, they lost their first 3-4 slam finals. Man, it's one thing if you're young and you lose a bunch of major finals, especially if you kind of get blown out in them, or at least in some of them. Zverev's been 2-love up. He's been 2-1 up. It's like, how much more can he take before that sort of breaks him? A few weeks after saying that, Zverev would lose in yet another major final. This was different than the previous two because he didn't blow a lead. He was never in position to win, but he got smoked with the capital S, and it definitely had an effect on him, and he said as much. Never really looked the same for the rest of the year. I think it was the most challenging year for Zverev mentally in terms of enjoying himself on the court and on the tour as a whole, and also physically with a lot more injuries popping up than what we are used to seeing with Zverev. Nothing major, but a lot of small things. It was a tough year for Zverev. He's still number 3 in the world at the end of it for a multitude of reasons. I mean, part of it is, you make a major final, you beat who you're supposed to beat. It wasn't really a year where anyone else seized upon that number 3 ranking and really made a great push. Look, Zverev, relative to his goals, will tell you that he had a terrible year. There's a lot of people in tennis media who will bend over backwards to defend him in general, which I get because he's 3 in the world, and you got a lot of bozos on the internet saying that he can't play worth a lick, and those two facts don't add up together. But obviously, when you're grading him on the curve that he would grade himself on, he had a rough year. So it's interesting to look back on that. Still, says something that a rough year for him is number 3 in the world. Let's move on. My number 4 prediction was Taylor Fritz, and Taylor ends up finishing at number 6 in the world. So I had him too high. One of the things I really like from him, and you talk about mental makeup, and I know I already praised him for it, but when he loses to Jannik Sinner in a U.S. Open final or at the year-end championships in Turin, he's pissed. Like, it hurts him. And that just gives me more confidence that he's going to be able to maintain his best level. This was a big focus for me going into my predictions last year, because I found the year before I fell into a trap of valuing talent over all else, when sometimes you do have to look at some of the intangibles and get behind a player like Taylor Fritz, who is going to maximize his output, match in and match out in the training room, on the practice court, all of that. And that's why I had the faith in him to finish number 4. And you know what? I'm not kicking myself at all for that prediction, because he had a poor first half of the season with a tricky little oblique injury that wouldn't go away. And then in the second half, he kind of went on a tear. So, very, very close. He was sitting at that number 5 spot until Felix ended up making a great run at the year-end championship. So I'm not upset with myself at all for putting Fritz at number 4. At number 5, this was my big miss, at least one of my big misses from my predictions at the start of the year. I had Andrei Rublev at number 5. I didn't like his 2024 at all, but I think he's an obvious bounce back candidate. Is that like the best argumentation ever? No, but look, it's Rublev. He's been top 8 5 years in a row. I don't think I need to make some elaborate case that he's going to do it again. There was no point over the course of the last year where this prediction seemed like it had any chance. I was able to explain away Rublev's 2024. I thought he hit a bit of a mental rough patch. He had the Dubai incident, and there were still flashes of an elite, high-level Rublev, at least kind of that tier 2 range Rublev that had been, Mr. Major quarterfinal and a guy who wins a lot of 500s and all of that. This year, there was none of that, and there wasn't really a great reason for it. I mean, he seemed better mentally. There was no injury. He just wasn't close to good enough. And game-wise, his strengths have just looked watered down to me, which is a huge concern. I checked out forehand quality because I was curious about it. In 2023, the last truly very good Rublev season there was, Rublev finished 7th in forehand quality that year. This year, he was down to 39th, which is just insane for a forehand, which for many, many years, we all would have regarded as among the best in the world. It is not there right now. And this was just very, very wrong, unfortunately for Rublev, who misses the top 10 for the first time in 5 years. At number 6, I picked Alex de Minaur, this was close. He ends up finishing this 2025 at number 7 in the world. I'm looking at pictures of him ahead of 2025. He's looking jacked. Like, it looks like he added even more weight, more upper body strength. And that's been a piece of the puzzle for him to start hitting bigger and serving bigger and being more offensively threatening. He is continuing to just add weight and add weight and add weight. And this sounds like a joke, right? Like, Gill, really? You're gonna see him sleep with a sleeveless shirt and base your prediction on that? Like, yeah, that kind of sounds like a joke, but I'm also a big proponent of the undersized players to be strong and bulky. Another year for de Minaur where he was relentlessly consistent at beating who he is supposed to beat, namely the players ranked below him. Struggled to punch up this year. Didn't have the same kind of consistency at the majors that he did in his 2024 campaign, but also didn't have a big injury in 2025. So he was able to stay active. There were a lot of tough losses, a lot of heartbreakers. I think he got frustrated that he wasn't able to kind of finish runs and beat fellow top teners. Obviously, the loss against Felix in the U.S. Open quarterfinals was tough, but then you look at the overall body of work, and it's another season for de Minaur where he earns a top 10 spot. And, you know, I'm glad that for a guy who's already surpassed expectations in his career, I kind of backed him to repeat what was his career best year, and I mostly hit it right. So good for Alex for kind of maintaining his positioning as a top 8 player in the world. My number 7 was Novak Djokovic. I undershot Novak Djokovic because he ends up finishing at number 4 this year. But my reasoning had some truth kernels in there. At number 7, I've got Novak Djokovic, which is where he finished last year. Because I think last year is going to end up being a pretty good indication of what and who Djokovic is moving forward. Somebody who, in flashes, is going to be elite, but also somebody who can't or doesn't have interest in maintaining that. Indeed, Djokovic played an extraordinarily light schedule. He played 3 tournaments in a row that were slams. Unheard of stuff. He played Roland Garros, Wimbledon, US Open. And that was a stretch of 3 events. He played no events other than that. So it was always going to be an uphill battle, given that kind of schedule, for Djokovic to finish in the top 5. But by making the semifinals at all 4 majors he competed in, he was able to salvage a very, very impressive year-end ranking for his age, especially. It's an interesting period for Djokovic right now because the standard has absolutely been lowered. He is no longer expected to compete with the very, very best and win major titles, yet his absolute mastery of this game from a technical, tactical, and mental standpoint still has him head and shoulders above the vast majority of the tour. At number 8, I predicted Jack Draper. And I struggle to kind of remember if most people had him higher than this, if most people had him lower than this. But Draper, in the first half of the year, looked as if he was going to surpass that prediction of 8 in the world. And then he suffers the arm injury, doesn't do a ton after getting to the final in Madrid, and he ends up 2 spots below my year-end prediction for Jack, ends up at number 10. The body is ready. The ideal play style is dialed in. I think he'll find himself in a lot of big matches next year. And that's why I have him at number 8, because I think he's going to be a lot more consistent. I think he's going to take care of business against lower tier competition on a much more regular basis. That said, I think this is going to be the year of losing big matches for Draper. Draper actually handled the big matches for the first few months of the season really, really well. I thought the health stuff would be mostly behind him. Maybe that was foolish to discount that at this point. But, the injury bug bites again. That said, there was some really positive, promising development of Jack Draper's game and Jack Draper's overall explosiveness that he will hope to continue starting in 2026. I predicted Daniil Medvedev to finish number 9. There were 2 predictions that the comment section was going crazy over and just crushing me for. This was one of the 2. And it was because I had Daniil Medvedev too low. It turns out I did not have Medvedev low enough. This serve thing for Medvedev, this isn't just an injury blip, I don't think. I don't think it's just like, yeah, Medvedev had a shoulder injury in the middle of the year and that's why his serve has gone down. No, like this is a longer term trend. And at this point, I just think physically the shoulder, and we've seen this before with certain players, like we saw it with Andy Roddick towards the end of his career. And by the way, Andy wasn't that old when this happened. Like his shoulder just started to kind of go on him. There's also an age thing here, okay? He's going to turn 29 in February. And that used to be the decline zone for tennis players. It used to be, okay, you're 29, you're old. That has changed. Don't get me wrong. But there is no precedent for Medvedev, a 6'6" guy who makes his money by scrambling point in and point out. I will say Medvedev's serve made a slight recovery this year. It wasn't back to his 2019 through 2021 prime serving level, but it was better than last year, and I don't think it was the main reason why he was struggling for so much of the year. There was clearly a loss in confidence for Medvedev. He no longer trusted his ball striking. He was cloudy-headed in even what he was trying to do on the court. He lost a lot of his strengths in his physicality and his consistency. At times he was pressing for offense and kind of losing what he was good at. And then, there were also instances in which he did try to kind of buckle down and keep the ball in the court, but the quality of his trading wasn't nearly good enough, and his defense wasn't nearly as stout enough. So, it ended up being, I think, that plus a clutchness issue for Medvedev. You look at the performance at the majors, that was particularly bad, where he never got out of the second round for the entire year, which if you look at the year prior, it was actually the performance at the slams that was actually propping up everything else. It ended up being just a very tough season for Daniil Medvedev, despite a much better level throughout the fall. Medvedev ends up finishing number 13 in the world. At number 10, I took a shot on Holger Rune. He has finished 2025 at world number 15, of course, missing the last few tournaments of the year after his horrible injury in Stockholm. Here's why I was optimistic that Rune could finish top 10 in 2025. You should almost have blind faith in a dude whose floor as a young player, when he looks totally disorganized, is still top 15. It's like, yeah, he should be top 10 because he should be improving. He should be figuring some things out and learning. And that also comes down to his coaching team, which has been a bit of a carousel, which hasn't helped him, I don't think. There hasn't been a lot of stability. This is the opposite Tsitsipas situation. I said if Tsitsipas hired someone I really liked, I might predict him in the top 10. If Rune hired anybody else, I might have him outside of the top 10. But he's got the guy who I think should be the guy, which is Lars Christensen, which is a proven formula. Rune did indeed find stability in his coaching team. He stuck with Lars Christensen the whole way. It just didn't translate to as much success as I thought it would. Still the physical inconsistencies kind of plaguing Rune. I still just don't feel like he is able to consistently trust his legs as much as he needs to maximize his strengths. And there are certain things like the return of serve and the forehand, not always operating at a top 10 level for Holger Rune. So slight miss on that one. I do want to go through some players who I correctly left out of the top 10, and then we'll talk about the players who I incorrectly left out of the top 10. I left out Casper Ruud. This was the second thing that had the commenters furious with me after Ruud had put together, consistent top 10 seasons. I want to say 3 out of the last 4 years, if not 4 out of the last 5, coming in to this 2025 campaign. But I saw a concern for Casper. It's 2 second halves in a row that have been ugly. And his hard court numbers, if you look at his hard court numbers in 2021 and 2022, they were better those 2 years than they've been in both 2023 and 2024. So we've seen hard court regression, and we've just seen these ups and downs. And as great as he is on clay, I just think it's a really hard formula to replicate and expect to be top 10 year after year after year. Sometimes it's going to happen, but if you only play well for 2-3 months out of the year, I just think it's hard to be consistently top 10. This ended up being a really good prediction. Ruud is 12 in the world. I had him as my 11. He was the guy who I was closest to putting in the top 10, just didn't get there. And, the main reason is he hurt his knee at Roland Garros and lost in the second round to Nuno Borges, and that was kind of it. And that explains the decline. But my point coming into the year was you can't have so much riding on 6 weeks of the year, because inevitably at some point that's playing with fire. If you have an injury or you happen to not be feeling your best at that specific time, it's so much easier to be a consistent top 10 player if you can compete at that level throughout the entire year. And I just think it's been too clay reliant since what I've perceived as a bit of a hard court decline for Casper Ruud since the terrific 2022 season that he had. I also left Stefanos Tsitsipas out of the top 10, which was not so obvious at the time. He ended up splitting with his father, Apostolos, towards the end of 2024, and that had a lot of people hopeful for a fresh start for Tsitsipas and a potential resurgence. I'm just not sure that Tsitsipas has found his coach, and I would love to predict a bounce back year for Tsitsipas, but that's not going to do it. There's probably an alternate universe where he makes a really great hire who I like, and maybe I do pick him in the top 10. Now, I got to give Tsitsipas credit. He did make the move that I wanted to see him make. He brought on Goran Ivanisevic. I'm not saying I wanted it to be or wanted to see it be Goran specifically, but I wanted someone of Ivanisevic's ilk to come in. I felt that was what Tsitsipas needed to do. He did that, but it didn't work at all. It blew up on him. It's clear that he isn't what he used to be physically or mentally. Ivanisevic obviously had very unkind things to say about the way Tsitsipas was managing his body, and now it's reunited with dad in the coaching box, and Tsitsipas ends up finishing the year at a pretty staggering world number 34. So it is the third consecutive year of relatively steep decline for Tsitsipas. I also left Grigor Dimitrov out of my top 10, even though I felt he played a top 10 level throughout 2024. And he was a popular pick to make the top 10. I just didn't trust the health. And he was the one guy whose age kind of scared me. There are not a lot of old guys in my top 10 other than Novak Djokovic, who's kind of in a category of his own. And, Dimitrov, just even before the catastrophic tear of his pectoral muscle, he wasn't looking quite the same. So, I think the kind of resurgence of Dimitrov, where he did get himself back in the top 10 briefly, I don't think it's up from here. I think it's probably down from here, unfortunately for Dimitrov, just given the natural, elements of father time that we're dealing with now. Berrettini, another guy whose health I didn't trust, along with a worrying top 10 record and not a ton of recent improvement. And indeed, Berrettini finds himself well out of the top 10 at the end of 2025. Also left Tommy Paul out. I felt like he had just sort of maximized at the edge of the top 10. Physically, mentally, technically, I felt like he was kind of doing all the right things, but not really breaking through. Paul ended up having a tough year physically, and that's why he ends up down at 20 in the world. Ultimately, I think he's a better player than his ranking reflects, and it was really just a matter of him getting hurt. But still, he was probably going to finish between 10 and 15, even without the injury. Fonseca and Fils I also mentioned, but I felt it was too soon for both of them. Fils ended up not having much of a chance because he suffered a big injury of his own. And for Fonseca, I wanted to mention his name and address him and kind of give my thoughts in the preview. He had a great rookie campaign on tour, but even a great rookie campaign is not a top 10 campaign. He ends up finishing a very respectable 24 in the world. Now, guys who I left out incorrectly, we've got to start. Actually, let me just reveal it visually here on YouTube. We've got to start with year-end number 5, Felix Auger-Aliassime. I put 2 plus signs next to his name, like I did for the other 2 players I didn't mention. I should have put 3 plus signs next to Felix's name because I didn't even have Felix as an honorable mention in my top 10 prediction video. And I looked, on top of that, it looked like I was right to not have him as an honorable mention for about 75% of the year. He had finished 29 in the world 2 years in a row. He was still outside the top 25 at the start of August. There were just no signs of a top 10 Felix emerging, but he did out of nowhere. He went on an absolute tear, like we saw at points of 2022. Now finishes at a new career high ranking. We all know what he's capable of indoors. But I think the U.S. Open run was really the crowning achievement of his season, to make the semifinal there, to beat as many great players as he did there, then to give Jannik Sinner a very respectable test in that semifinal match. Did not see Felix coming whatsoever, not even really kicking myself for it, though. Ben Shelton is an interesting one. Shelton finishes at number 9. I did have him as an honorable mention, but I felt like he was going to get boxed out of the top 10, and this was my reasoning for that. I need to see more progress in the return game before I can consider him for the top 10. He was 77th among qualified players in break rate last year, 77th. The worst serve breaker in the top 10 was Taylor Fritz, who was 43rd. Wasn't seeing enough progress on the return of serve. So what was that progress looking back? He improved his break rate this year from 77th on tour to 68th on tour. Still not really good, but just a little better. Held serve a bit more. The biggest factor here is the over performances at slams. And in this case, a Masters 1000 title at a tournament where both Sinner and Alcaraz were absent from the draw. He was the one that seized it. He was the one that took advantage. So these kind of big, massive point grabs, these big runs at these big events are the main thing helping Shelton, even though week to week to week, the underlying numbers, the analytics suggest that he's not quite as good as his ranking. I'll just give you one example. Let's look at win percentage. Ben Shelton, despite finishing year-end number 9, had the 19th best win rate on tour. Now you might be thinking he went 0-3 at the year-end championships, and obviously that's 3 matches against really tough players. Most guys don't have that factored in. So it's only fair. You look before the year-end championships began, and Shelton was 14th in win rate. And he came into the event, I think, as 5 in the world, but he was 14th in win rate. So this just goes to show you he's getting, just a couple runs here or there at big events, that's what you need. And Shelton continues to sort of use that sort of big match mental edge to sort of punch up above his underlying analytics and sort of kind of break some of the, I don't know, traditional patterns that you normally see. And lastly, Lorenzo Musetti. Stylistically, in terms of his attributes and how he's built as a player, I still think he fights a bit of an uphill battle. The serve and the return need to keep getting better so he can put himself in better positions more consistently. He's still young. I think he's going to be a top 10 player at some point, but not yet. I'm kicking myself on this one because for most of the clay court season, Musetti looked like the third or fourth best player in the world. And then he got hurt at Roland Garros, which kind of took away his grass season. Grass is his second best surface where he can use the chip return effectively and obviously mixing in the backhand slice. Plus his movement is very athletic on the grass and he's able to defend well. Musetti probably should have ended up finishing higher than what he did, although the hard court continues to be somewhat of a struggle. But he makes his first career year-end championships. And this is one I feel like I should have clocked it that, Musetti was trending in the right direction. He's been getting more and more physical, more and more emotionally stable in terms of his match play. And he's a beautiful player who's wonderfully talented. Should have seen that coming and didn't. And let's end on that. There's a final look on my predicted top 10 versus the actual top 10 side by side. Let me know, how do you think I did? I'm pretty happy with my performance this year. I've got one more thing to announce before I sign off, though, and it has to do with predictions. I'm, for the first time, going to give everybody a chance in 2026, as long as everything goes as planned, to compete against me in the tournament prediction sphere. Just friendly competition. No money on the line. Maybe I'll partner with a brand and we'll do giveaways, something cool like that. But really, it's just something that we can engage with as a community, a Monday Match Analysis community. I'm partnering with an app called Balky. They're creating a system of being able to draft players before every single tournament, a scoring system that I am helping to design. And we're going to have some friendly competition in 2026 on tournament predictions. So you can look forward to that. I will put a link in the description if you want to download the app and kind of sign up early. That way you're already in the mix, but I'll promote it. I'll continue to promote it as we get closer to the year. All right. Next up for us is Monday Match Analysis Awards. I'll see you then. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.